Good morning, Parks class. Parks learning community, isolating bubble at the moment. You might not be in school, but we are thinking of you. So remember, we are reading this book. It's Benjamin Zephaniah, Windrush Child, and we missed our reading, so I'm going to go for it now. It's chapter 5. Remember, Leonard's preparing to come to England. We spent a couple of weeks preparing to leave. I was miserable, but I couldn't show it. As a 10-year-old, I couldn't argue with my elders. It just wasn't done. If I tried to simply talk about it, the conversation always ended up with Mum or Grandma telling me that the decision had been made and that there was nothing I could do about it. Once, when I asked Mum what she felt about leaving, she sounded full of happiness and said, England will change our lives forever. We're so lucky to have the chance to go to such a wonderful place." Then another time when I asked her, she seemed sad. She sighed and said, "Well, it's a long way to go and we're leaving everything that we know behind, but we are doing this for you." I didn't see it that way. I was happy with my coconut tree, my mango tree, and all other things I loved. I didn't think I needed anything else, apart from my dad, maybe, but I wanted my dad in Jamaica. I didn't know much about England. At school I learned about some of their kings and queens and about the big British Empire, but I didn't know what it was really like. Cole Massey told me it was very cold. He said sometimes birds would drop out of the sky because they froze as they were flying. But my teacher said it gets really hot in England. She read me a poem about daffodils and said daffodils grow where it's hot. I was so confused at their different answers. I ended up asking Brother Book. "England is a place of 4 seasons," he told me. "It is more complicated than just hot and cold." People kept telling me that life would be good in England, and deep down I wanted it to be. I tried to get excited about the change of country. I tried to imagine myself in a country that sounded modern, where the people were richer, but I couldn't. My heart would sink when I thought about how I would miss my friends, my school, Grandma, and Maroon Town. Sometimes I cried, but I always cried when I was alone, and the night before we left, I slept very little because I cried so much. The next day I stood looking at our suitcases, dressed in a suit my mum bought for the journey, a suit that was too big for me. The suit felt heavy and hot, too hot for the Jamaican heat. I took the postcard that my dad had sent to me and I put it in my inside pocket. Then I went to my grandma and held her hand as tightly as I could. I had a feeling that I would never see her again. She looked directly into my eyes and said 3 words that I've never forgotten. "Lions always roar." Her voice was fierce. "What does that mean?" I asked. "Never be afraid to speak your mind. When the lion roars, it's only telling you how it feels." The sun had blessed Grandma's skin so beautifully that she shone, and the way her voice had aged gave it power. "When you arrive in England," she said, "there might be some people there that don't like you. But Leonard, let me tell you something. Hatred is always a reflection of the hater. You are a lion. Speak truth always, and do good so that good will follow you." I had spent so much of my life with my grandma. I felt it. I felt like my heart was being pulled from my chest as we said goodbye. She was very matter of fact. "What must be done," she said. It wasn't that easy for me. I was losing my friends in Maroon Town, the fruit trees and my vegetables, and most importantly, my grandma. I just couldn't understand how any of that was going to make life better for me. If they wanted me to be happy, why didn't my dad just come home? Mum woke me up very early in the morning. I was so tired she had to shake me to get me to open my eyes, and as soon as I did, I could smell the plantains that Grandma was cooking. We had packed the suitcase the night before, but Mum was in a hurry. She only slowed down when we sat down to eat breakfast. It was only then that we heard the roosters crowing in the distance. I'd never been up before them. Throughout breakfast, Grandma was giving Mum messages for Dad. It was still dark when we started eating, but by the time we had finished, it was light. After breakfast, as the day started to warm, Grandma bent down and hugged me on the veranda. "You must be a good boy over there. You hear?" "Yes, Grandma," I replied. "And you must study hard so we can be proud of you, all right?" "Yes, Grandma," I said. I wanted to tell her how much I didn't want to go, but I knew I had lost that argument. I was still holding Grandma's hand as she hugged Mum, but then the time had come. I reluctantly released Grandma's hand and walked to the road to get the bus to the centre of town. From the centre of Maroon Town, we took an old bus to Kingston, the capital city of Jamaica. I had only been to Kingston once before. I was 2 years old, and I don't remember it, but I was told that I hated riding the bus. My mum said that I had screamed for the entire journey, and I wasn't surprised if it was anything like this bus. It was packed with people with their arms and legs hanging out of the windows. Some sat on the roof, and there was even a goat being sheltered under a man's coat. The driver was more interested in the banana he was eating than the bend we were approaching. So when he took the bend, people had to hang on for their lives. A lady's suitcase fell from the roof of the bus, but the driver didn't even stop to get it. Instead, he accelerated, jolting us forward, then backwards, and then forward again. "Can you stop driving like a madman, please?" my mum shouted. "There are children on the bus, you know." The driver grunted something under his breath and just threw the skin of his banana out of the window. If my mum expected an answer, she was not going to get it from him. I was really hoping that my dad wasn't a bus driver like this bus driver. We spent the day in Kingston. The streets were swarming with people and roads were full of cars. Here the buildings were bigger, the cars were fast, and the roads were better than the ones near home. There were cars in Maroon Town, but they would pass by every now and again. In Kingston, the cars just kept coming. We had to be very careful when we crossed the road. Living on the edge of a small place like Maroon Town, the air was clean. But in the big city, all the cars, all the people, and all the animals created smells that I had never experienced. I was wondering if we smelt of country. I wiped the sweat off my forehead with my mum's sleeve and kept moving. We had our entire lives packed in one large brown suitcase. Bits had fallen off it. The handle was just about hanging on. I tried to pick the suitcase up, but I couldn't even move it. "My boy, you are not as strong as your dad yet," my mum said, smiling. I felt sad. I felt useless. I wanted to help my mum, but she peeled my fingers from the suitcase handle and carried it herself. When my dad wrote to mum, he would always write a line to me, telling me to be the man of the house while he was away. And here I was, being put in my place for trying to do as I was told. I dragged my feet and sulked as we weaved through the fruit markets and held our breaths through the meat section. I was terrified of Kingston. It was just so different from Maroon Town. People seemed hurried and stressed. Their faces were wrinkled and less kind. We checked into a guest house near the port. There were 2 single beds, and as soon as I got into mine. I lay in bed, unable to sleep for a long time, because thoughts were rushing around my head about what the journey would be like. Outside, the noise of the city never seemed to stop. I started to think about my dad. I wanted to see him, of course, but I didn't want to leave the sunshine, and I was already beginning to miss my grandma's arms. The next morning was April the 13th, 1958. We quickly ate some fruit and rushed outside, where we shuffled on to yet another broken old bus. As we approached the harbour, my attitude started to change. Many people were walking in the same direction, and I could feel excitement in the air. Then when I looked up, I saw the biggest thing I'd ever seen in my life. A ship. We are going to look forward to reading more in 2021 in the Grange Parks class. Thank you, everybody. See you in 2021.